was about 12 or 13 when I heard Love Me Do, when that was first released, and then the Beatles became part of one's life. You were looking forward to each album, and everyone was so different to the last, and they became, it's a cliche, but they became the soundtrack of one's life.
Yeah. And so I'd love to know how this project came about, and I guess we have two sides of the coin here, the filmmakers but also the Apple side. So what was the starting point?
The starting point was really during the making of Get Back, the series, and Peter Jackson asked me, he said, have you got any outtakes of the Maisels? And I took a deep breath, because the one archive we hadn't really sorted out was the Maisels archive. When Al Maisel sent it to us in the 80s, I wasn't there then, he sent it over, and it was hundreds of cans of footage, and it really needed expert, breakdown and reassembly, and frankly, we didn't have the people at the time to do anything about it. So I told Peter, and he said, well, never mind. But he said, look, we should talk about it sometime. So then Get Back, went its course, and then he said, so the Maisels archive, what are you going to do about it? And I said, well, we need to sort this out. And he said, well, I tell you what, send it all over here. We'd love to do it. We like big puzzles, and we're Kiwis. We like a challenge. So we just sent everything down there, and then he reassembled it in Rush's order with no paperwork at all, using edge numbers and all sorts of things. And it was not in a good state. There was a bit of vinegar syndrome, which is like a sort of virus that can run through footage of a certain age, and broken sprockets and the rest. Anyway, took them 3 years. So when they finished it, Peter said, so what are you going to do with it? Which is a good question. And as it happened, we were thinking, well, it's the 60th anniversary of the Beatles going to America coming soon, and there was a discussion internally at Apple, and in the end it was really Olivia who said, well, we really should speak to Marty and David. Marty, and to a degree, David had experience of knowing the Maisel brothers, which David can talk about, but they seemed like, there was that incredible relationship, New York, and Paul and Ringo and Sean agreed, and that's how they got to make the film. So it's a very long-winded answer, but that's.
Yes, and David and Margaret, on your side, when you were approached for this, what did you have in mind for this project? And I guess this is the chance to talk about the Maisel brothers, their footage, which is so striking even today.
Well, a couple of things happened at once. The first thing is, about a month before I first talked to Olivia and Jonathan, we were going to film festivals with a film called Personality Crisis. And Jack Douglas, who you see in the film, makes the music for Personality Crisis. And we were at the Savannah Film Festival, and we were sitting on the park bench, not unlike Forrest Gump. And he told me this whole story. His actual story is much longer than what you see in the film. But he told me that whole story. And I had known other people, including myself, who had really, the Beatles had really had a greater impact on their life, on my life, than just, it influenced me, but really saved them, or really had a direct influence on who they became as a human being. So when I talked to Jonathan and Olivia, I talked about that on the one hand, and on the other hand, yeah, I knew Scorsese had hired Al Maisels for rehearsal, to shoot rehearsals and behind the scenes stuff for Shine a Light, and I shadowed Al for a couple of days, as much as I could. I was the editor of Shine a Light, and I was fascinated with how he was able to, how he would focus on somebody, and how they would be generous with their energy and their, somehow, for instance, he was talking to Keith Richards, and Keith was more open than any time I've seen him recently in an interview, or at the time, because it was a while ago, it was about 14 years ago. So between the two, I had a feeling, and I knew some of the footage, I'd seen what's happening, But I had a feeling that there was a lot of, I knew that, like Charlotte Swearon, or sort of a more serious person, hadn't worked on what's happening, hadn't really worked on First U.S. Visit. So I rolled the dice, and I thought there's got to be stuff in there.
And when you were looking at this footage, Margaret, what were you thinking creatively as a producer as well, with a
I
project
was
like
thinking,
this?
I'm really glad I wasn't there 3 years before when it was all those pans that had to be put together. Although there's part of me that would have loved that too. Yeah, I mean, being New Yorkers, Albert Maysles was omnipresent. I mean, he was this incredible, we revered him. If you were into documentary films and filmmaking, he and Pennebaker, were it, and they were both very much present in New York when I came to New York and was working in the film business. So I admired him professionally, I admired him personally, and this footage just captured the band in a way that, I don't think you had seen, before. This band was having so much fun. This is all new. It's a different time. It's kind of at the very beginning of the story. If Get Back is kind of towards the end of the story, this is the beginning. And the joy when they're playing, the Washington Coliseum concert, they are a band that is at the fucking height of, musical, just nirvana. They're just so happy, and it's just an infectious thing. And then you have all the fans that we've kind of never heard from before. As I have seen, it's this real kind of you were there moment. So it was very exciting. I didn't know what David would ultimately kind of put together, but the Jack story was there, and there were these ideas of kind of having this parallel track in the film that showed the impact and the people who were there talking about their experience, but then the audience seeing it as well. So that was kind of our first thought.
Can you lead me through that process of building the film around the footage? And what was the involvement of, they're on screen, but Paul and Ringo, what was their involvement in the creative decisions and leading on the path, or did you have freedom to tell that story as well?
Many of our films, structurally, we do in a really non-linear way. But I would say in this film, in terms of this footage of the Maysles shot, as much as possible, we made it chronological. We certainly tried to make it feel chronological. What was your other question?
What say did the families of the Beatles have, and did they give you some notes about what they wanted in the story, or how much freedom do you have?
I always feel absurd saying this, but it's the reality of how we edit things. We had 1 year, which for our process is an incredibly quick turnaround. And so the degree to which Paul and Ringo and Olivia Harrison and Sean Lennon weighed in was very helpful, because you want intelligent feedback. And we screen for people within the office, but I'll give you one example. Olivia pushed for the inclusion of Pat Boone and Little Richard, because the world has changed so much, it's almost impossible to believe that that radio in the United States was segregated, and some white stations wouldn't play black artists, and most black artists were re-recorded by a Pat Boone. So there, and all of them weighed in, to the degree, with their interests. But it was a very happy process, and I think everyone was very aware of the 12-month turnaround.
So in the process of putting this film together, when you kind of come up with these bullet points, these topics, these little side points you want to make about segregation, about mass media, about Kennedy. How do they come to mind? Do they rise out of the footage and then you put a marker there saying, let's explore this further?
Well, you know, whenever you think of the 1960s, I think of the counterculture and all the changes, you know, almost a complete paradigm change within society. But you look at this footage, it could be the 1950s or the 1940s. You know, everyone's talking about the long hair, and the hair's not that long. That's one thing. The other thing is, I want to just talk a little bit about what Margaret was saying about the fans. I read this essay when we were looking for people to interview. I read this essay by Sigrid Nunez, and who would not agree to be in the film for a variety of reasons. But it was really unbelievable. She was 12. She's a very good writer. She was 12 years old at a pajama party in the Bronx when she first heard the Beatles, and she loved them. And all through the years, she felt as if mainstream society minimized who she was as a Beatle fan. You know, it's just a bunch of girls screaming. And her point, in a way, was we heard something that nobody else heard. And everybody caught up with us. And I thought about that, how the fans at the time were never taken seriously. The Beatles themselves were never taken, it was difficult for the Beatles to be taken seriously at first in America. You see it with all the ridiculous reviews, whether it's Newsweek or Eric Severide from CBS News. But the fans in particular are just a bunch of dumb, screaming girls. And I think that was the first point. And I think it became clear very quickly that they represented some kind of cultural shift. And I mean, you know, John Lennon is able to articulate quite amazing things. And I think he articulates something very intelligent about the film in terms of their role of what happened in the 60s in terms of these cultural changes. But you see it all in the footage in 1964, whether it's the civil rights or even anti-war. You know, people are already being drafted for Vietnam.
I mean, there's that phrase, isn't there, that's usually used when talking about costume drama films, a face that's never seen an iPhone. And these girls and the kids in this footage is just so pure, it's so real. And I guess that's testament to what was captured at the time. Jonathan, I wanted to ask, so if the restoration and all that work was almost done before the team came on, what actually are we looking at here, and what restoration work has been done? Because there's also, you look at the credits, there's the MAL team, the audio demixing and all that stuff.
Another part of this is the MAL team, the machine-assisted learning, which is demixing a mono track. And they did amazing work, on the Get Back film, because I don't, if you remember, it's a lot of them sitting around talking across each other and people shouting in the background, how many T's, you know, all that stuff. And it drove Peter Jackson mad, because he said, I want to isolate this, I want to hear this person speak, or I want to hear that instrument, or, you know. And there was eventually a breakthrough, thanks to putting the film back for a year, which had to do with the pandemic. And his technicians managed to do this, so he could break down take a scene where there's people talking across each other, across the way people talk. And he could isolate he said, I want to hear John. He could only hear John, or he wanted to hear Ringo, or he wanted to hear a tambourine and nothing else. And that's how Get Back ended up not being a mass of subtitles. But that was interesting, and so they came to this film, and it's not a performance film, it's a documentary. But Giles said, you know, what I'd love to do is see if Giles Martin, who, you know, worked on the music mixes specifically, he said, I'd like to take the Sullivan Show and the Washington concert, the recording of which was just the recording of, you know, at that time, which was pretty bad, poor, and send it down to New Zealand, which he did. And then he got back the demixed versions of those Sullivan performances and of Washington. So he had multi-track, so he could remove the screams, mix the music, and then bring the screams back to a level where you've got that sense of excitement and performance. And I think you saw it at its best for Long Saw Sally, which it's such an elevating thing to watch and listen to. So that's so exciting to be able to, for people to hear what the Beatles sounded like live, how fucking good they were, Jesus, but they had done so many years of playing in clubs, and they were a well-honed unit before they became famous, which doesn't often happen nowadays. And so it was exciting to be able to present the live music in that way, and I think, was that the question?
No,
Thank you.
And the other thing with the Park Road post-production restoration of the picture elements, it ends up looking just miraculous. The Maisels footage was beautiful, but some of it, was, there was work print intermixed, so it was a varying quality, and the restoration just strips away the decades of, natural degradation that happens to film. But also, what happened was, with all the archive that was being gathered for the film, and photographs, but mainly archive from, news sources and film elements that were at archives that they didn't have, they'd never transferred it. What we were able to do, we sent everything to Park Road, because the goal was to have everything look, pristine, so that a contemporary audience looks at this and feels like they were there. So that was really kind of the idea. So you wouldn't have this, beautiful footage and then some scratched footage, and you wanted to kind of keep the audience in that moment.
Can I quickly ask about, is it the colour 8mm footage that's so striking the black and white footage is incredible and known for the time, but that is really shocking. What's the source for that footage?
That was a, okay, so, Jonathan knows all these people, but we're new to the Beatles world, but there's this network of collectors, and they know everything about, they have specialties from, there is a Beatles February 1964 collector, right? So anyway, we kind of had, through Jonathan and some other people, we were made aware of this guy named Joe Shiroff, and you see him in the footage when the Beatles car is pulling away, and there's a young guy, really kind of cool looking young guy with a Bell and Howell camera shooting into the car. That's Joe Shiroff. So we were able to kind of, over the course of months, talk to him, our incredible archival producer, Austin Short, you develop these relationships, and Joe allowed us to take his treasured footage that he had never, transferred before, and we did a beautiful transfer of that. And the color, especially in contrast with the Maisels, the beautiful black and whites, then you have this incredible Kodachrome, or Ektachrome, I'm not sure which, but of this fan footage, and you just get this authenticity that, and the energy of the fans is in that footage. So we have some of that interspersed, and then of course there's other news archive and just images of New York City at that time that again had just been transferred from the original 16mm elements, and it just all comes together to create this sense of place and time.
Yeah, really, what a find. Folks, I'll be throwing over to you in a minute. Do we have a roving mic, Ryan? Or will I have to shout out? Well, you'll have to silence myself to my audience.
And then we can share.
But first, can we discuss the elephant in the room, the Martin Scorsese aspect? Of course, David and Margaret, you've been close collaborators with Martin for years, shining light, living material world, all the way back to the blues and beforehand. What was his involvement? Because he pops up in the Ringo into footage, but what was his involvement in the project?
We talk quite a lot. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges is that this is a very well-known story, and it's been told many times. So we talk about it a lot at the very beginning. How do you tell this story in a new way? What is specific to this story in particular? I think very helpful in that regard. And then he watched cuts, and he shared what he thought was working and what he didn't think was working. And for the most part, he thought what he saw was working.
That's wonderful to hear.
He also lived in New York at that time. He's kind of a contemporary of the Beatles in the sense that he was born around the same time. And so he went through it, he experienced it. And he remembers, he has his own, first time he heard the Beatles on the radio story, Cousin Brucey made him late to his class at NYU. So he really, he, like everybody, just, reveres the Beatles and is kind of in awe of them. And so he was just fascinated to explore this time because he's such a historian. And of course, the idea of all this restored footage, he is Mr. Film Preservation.
Yeah.
And so all of these elements, and he's, we're all dear friends with Olivia, and we, work great with Apple. So everything about this was, really exciting for him. And then, the interviews were interesting to him because he gets so much out of, Marty has made as many documentaries as features almost. He's always worked in nonfiction, from Italian American, the film he made about his parents, to Last Waltz, to No Direction Home, to, Made in Milan, a film he made about Giorgio Armani. His impulse is real life, right? And so when these interviews, the idea of oral histories is very appealing to him, and he's talked to David and I a lot about this, he gets a lot from interviews and how people behave in documentary interviews when he's any kind of, that helps his narrative films. It brings a certain kind of nuance and revelation that he can kind of work with in the fiction world.
He's also quite, as you can imagine, bold. And I'd say on the two films that we co-directed, by vocation, I'm a film editor. Film editors are not necessarily known for their boldness. And when he has an impulse, he wants to shoot. He wants to film. And then you can't really make a film unless you're filming. And in a way that helped me. And he's very honest with his reactions. I was thinking when you said, that he gets a lot out of the interviews, it was very interesting when we were making public speaking. He had me watch Portrait of Jason, which I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's a brilliant film by Shirley Clark. And it has very few cuts. But I think it taught him, when he was a young filmmaker, the power of somebody on film, and how, if they're being honest and emotional, and of course it's very emotional, how you can build a film and a story from that material.
And very quickly before we throw it to the audience, this being a little White Lies crowd, a film nerd crowd, I gasped when I heard David Lynch's voice before I even saw him come on. So can you tell me the story behind involving him and interviewing him and what that was like?
Well, when David was, starting to think about who to interview, and we were kind of talking about...
This David was thinking, yeah.
Oh, that's David. We always wanted to... David Lynch was one of the first people that we thought of, because we knew he had been at the Washington Coliseum show. And that in and of itself was so kind of interesting. He was a kid, it's an 18-year-old kid living in Alexandria, Virginia. And he also had met John F. Kennedy. And he was an Eagle Scout that was asked to kind of be an usher at Kennedy's inauguration. And he tells this incredible story about, being called to go greet the people coming out of the cars, and at one point he looks in and he sees Kennedy, Eisenhower, and Johnson? Nixon.
Maybe Johnson too.
He's like 3 presidents. Anyway, so he's, your mind is blown, right? So he had all these things going that were kind of connected to our film and the themes in our film. And he also, he's a meditator. He can speak to the change in consciousness that the Beatles and other people, kind of brought into the culture in the later part of the 60s. But he was, not really doing interviews. And so he was the second to last interview that we were able to do. Because it was just a matter of being, the jerky producer to keep going back, you know, even though he said, no. Well, you know, what about if we come back in 2 months? And anyway, so we finally were able to interview him, and it was well worth the wait.
The way he enunciates girls squealing, screaming, yeah, singing. Okay, gang, over to you. I think we need to share a microphone. If Margaret, would you mind handing over? Just thank you. Any hands up? Questions? There's someone right on the end of the row. That was shot up immediately.
Yeah, we've got to get a train back to Milton Keynes. We might be stuck here.
I'm right there with you. I've got a train back to Brighton, don't we?
First of all, thank you very much. That was stunning. All the hard work you must have put in was truly amazing. And out of this speaker, Paul McCartney's bass on Long Tall Sally was almost deafening. You could hear every single note. So thank you as a lifelong Beatles fan. But what I want to know is, what is your favourite bit of the whole thing? If you had to pick a minute or two, I know it's very hard. I just was intrigued by what your favourite bits were. I love Long Tall Sally. It was mind-blowing.
The favorite bit from the whole movie? I would say Long Tall Sally, and the shot where Al Maisels is clearly, Margaret already referred to it, Al Maisels is clearly like on the ground shooting up, and you see John and Ringo and Paul and the hundreds of fans, and the car starts moving and you see the fans running and the camera and the horses. It's just that's a $1 million budget just for that damn shooting.
The performances, I feel like, you know, Long Tall Sally, but also She Loves You. I mean, the Washington Coliseum songs, you know, performances are incredible. But in terms of the intimacy, I love that scene where maybe it's the first day of filming at the Plaza Hotel, and they're all kind of a little, not quite, they're still aware of the cameras, and Paul ends up saying, you know, to go down on the mic, he said, defy convention. And I thought, well, if there's an imperative, like that's like, defy convention. It's like good words to live by. But yeah, that was one of my favorite moments.
Well, I'm going to cheat and give you two. One is the opening scene where they're on the train and they're fascinated by Al and David's equipment. And they're trying the microphone and going, God, look at this, he can do it. I love that because it's just so natural, and they were so curious about everything. And the second one was the nightclub scene, which I just think has an energy. It was just so infectious. You kind of wanted to be there dancing with them.
Thank you. It's amazing, incredible.
We all are kind of strangely obsessed with A Wee Doc and Dory too. That kind of swirled around our heads for too much of the past year.
Oh yeah.
I think actually somebody in the middle of the same row, and then we'll come to the person in the row in front afterwards.
Hi there. I was really impressed by it, and I was quite sceptical because I'm such a big fan of the Beatles' first US visit from 10 years ago, which is basically the original Miles Brothers film. So how conscious were you of not rehashing what they had did in that? Because I thought that was a definitive, presentation of what happened there. But obviously there's some new footage and stuff, but I don't know. My question is, how conscious were you of not rehashing what we'd already seen there?
I had seen First US Visit, and I had seen what's happening, and there are a few other iterations out there. I even eventually saw there's a version of what's happening, which was on CBS television, that had Carol Burnett interstitials to make it more palatable for a general audience from 1964. But I treated, when we got the footage from Park Road, I treated like I'd never seen anything before, and that everything was new. And we built the story based on that, and then we went back to figure out if it was exactly the same as what's happening or First US Visit. And it wasn't. There was other material. I would say two things that distinguish the film, I think, in a very important way. One is the Maisels were not, in this case, as so interested in the music. You know, we incorporated Sullivan and the Washington Coliseum. The Maisels, that's not the story they wanted to tell. And then later, Al had said, you know, I wish we had paid a little bit more attention to the fans, because they were pretty interesting. When I look at the footage now, it was pretty interesting. But at the time, we felt like it wasn't what we were doing. And of course, when I saw the footage of the fans on the street in New York, I was, you know, charmed and fascinated with their energy and what they had to say.
I think you put a jump.
Without cutting in too much, like I thought this film was. I'm such a big Beatles fan. I'm a fan of Beatles documentaries. This felt like something that was quite historical that I was watching tonight. It didn't feel like other things I've seen. I thought 8 Days a Week was a massive failure because they didn't use a lot of new stuff, and it felt like a rehash of anthology and stuff we'd seen. And I kind of expected this to be like that tonight, so I was quite impressed because it felt like something new, but more impressively, the tone of it felt like something new. It felt, I don't know, it felt quite sad and beautiful in equal measure because it felt historical in a way that I've never seen a Beatles thing, so congratulations.
Thank you for your comments. I think you're narrowing a selling project.
Hi, I went to see the Eye of the Storm exhibition when it was on in London, and it was so lovely to see it in film, and I just wondered how much of that exhibition influenced the film, and if you knew it was coming out when you were making it.
I mean, the exhibit opened in London pretty early. We opened the edit room about a year ago, a little over a year ago. I don't think we knew it was coming to Brooklyn for a while. Listen, all the photographs influenced us. Like Ringo and Paul, we didn't have anything from George. Their point of view jumps out when you see their photographs and occasional Super 8 footage.